Hey, everybody. Welcome to In Case It Happens. My name's John Darr, and I'm here with my co-host,
Marie Banks.
Marie Banks. So Marie's a personal injury attorney with Schackow Mercadante. I'm an insurance agent. And in this podcast, we typically talk about things that happen and cases, and sometimes very real cases and coverages and how they apply and all that. So we hope you enjoy the podcast. Today, we're going to talk about renting a car. You know, it's that time of year that sometimes folks travel to see relatives, and, you know, it's holiday season, it's November, and sometimes they rent a car. And what does that mean? And in case that happens to you, what should you look out for, and what should you be aware of? So hopefully you enjoy the podcast. If you do, remember to hit like and share, and that helps the podcast grow. So, Marie, why don't you kick it off with a little bit of legalese about rental cars?
Yeah, so I think that most people, if they're going on a trip, the absolute last thing they're thinking about is getting in a car accident. But that's what this podcast is about. In case it happens, now you can be prepared, think ahead. You'll have all this stuff swimming in your brain next time you have to rent a vehicle. But a lot of people maybe don't understand what the law says about rental car accidents. So, for instance, in Florida, we have something called the Dangerous Instrumentality Doctrine. And essentially that means if you own a vehicle and you let someone else borrow the vehicle, the state calls it a dangerous instrument, because it is.
Very.
People with it. Dangerous instrument. You are going to be responsible for whatever happens as a result of using that vehicle. If the person you lend the vehicle to causes an accident, you as the owner of the vehicle will be held what's called vicariously liable for the accident. The driver of the vehicle will also be held responsible, but you as the owner are going to be on the hook as well. So first of all, a lot of people don't know that Florida has that doctrine. It's very important, and that's why it's very important that you think about it before you let people borrow your vehicle. So what about in the instance of a rental car? Who owns the rental car? The rental car company. So a lot of people might think, oh, if somebody causes an accident and it's a rental vehicle, then I can collect damages from Enterprise or, any other Avis, any other rental car company. And some people think Deep Pockets, it's a company. It used to be that way, that the company would be held responsible because they own the vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
But after a while, people thought that's really not fair, because if you think about this is their business, and if they're constantly having to pay out claims for something they didn't even do, then it kind of disincentivizes people to be in that business. So in 2005, our United States Congress passed a federal law called the Graves Amendment. It's just named after the Representative Sam Graves who brought it. The Graves Amendment essentially preempted any state law on vicarious liability and said you can't hold a rental car company responsible for any accidents caused by, their vehicles. There are a couple of exceptions to that. Obviously, if the company didn't maintain the brakes and they knew the brakes were bad and they let someone rent it, then that's actual negligence that they had. So there are a couple of exceptions like that, but by and large, they let somebody rent their vehicle, and now that person who rents the vehicle is responsible for any accidents they cause.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of interesting little nuances and weird cases that can spring off from, the moment someone rents a vehicle, and maybe you've done this, or I'm sure a lot of our listeners, viewers have. You rent a car and you let someone else drive it. Maybe they're not on the contract with, the rental company, or you say, yeah, you can borrow this. I rented it. It doesn't matter if you drive it. What happens if that person causes an accident? Mm-hmm. So those are the kinds of questions. And I actually have a case going right now that involves that type of fact pattern. So maybe before we dive into the details of what the law says about that, on the insurance side, if I rent a vehicle and I'm going to be held responsible for whatever happens once I rent it, where does my insurance come into play? Oftentimes there's an option to purchase insurance through the rental car company. So insurance agent, what should people do when they're renting a car? How do they work through what insurance actually applies?
Yeah, so there's a couple different options, and so when you go to rent a car, they will offer two different coverages at least. Maybe there's more than that now, but the main coverages are the coverage on the car itself, the comp and collision coverage in case you wreck the car. They will offer coverage there. And then there's the liability side of things, where in case you were in an accident, they will also pay to cover the liability side of an accident if your driver's at fault.
So like the injury claims that might result from that, your injury one. And you opt for one, or like, can you cherry pick?
You can do one or the other. And then your insurance typically will cover a rental car if you're renting it for personal reasons, not business use. So we have a lot of clients now that are traveling for business, on a regular basis. They're renting cars on a regular basis. They go every couple of weeks, and, well, if it's a business used vehicle, typically your regular personal auto insurance is not going to cover you there. So you really have to understand and think about, okay, I'm renting this car for pleasure. Is it just family vacation? Or is it, I got to fly to Chicago to go to a business meeting? That's not a pleasure use type situation. So your personal auto is not going to cover it. Now, a lot of times,
should they purchase the insurance in that case? Can they then get reimbursed by their company or whatever and say,
yeah, a lot of times, yeah, the business is paying. So, the business maybe will rent the vehicle or pay to rent the vehicle. And typically the business may have some coverage for that. What I can't get coverage for is a couple of things. Number one, I cannot, the insurance companies that we have for personal auto will not cover loss of use. So for example, you get in an accident, it's, vehicle's damaged, like this guy right here. It's going to take a while to fix that vehicle. And the rental car company is entitled to bill you for all of the time that vehicle is out of their fleet. And they will charge you whatever it is, the daily rate, for possibly months and months until that vehicle gets fixed. The insurance companies that we represent we don't have any way of getting that coverage for you. So we recommend to folks that if that is a concern, if you don't want to take on that risk and assume that risk yourself, buy the comp and collision coverage from the rental car company. The liability
collision would cover that.
Comp and collision would cover that. Yeah. The second thing is what we call diminution of value. So when you rent a brand new Honda Accord, and if that Accord is in an accident and needs to be fixed, the value of that Accord, which is owned by the rental car company, has decreased. And it could be thousands of dollars. If somebody wants to buy a car that's not been wrecked, way more than they would want to buy a car that has been wrecked. Well, the rental car company says we're entitled to the difference between the car brand new and the car now that it's wrecked. And again, could be thousands of dollars. We have no way of protecting you for that diminution of value. So for those two reasons alone, we try to suggest to people, hey, you might want to buy the comp and collision at least. The liability is a different animal, but the comp and collision is definitely an option. Unfortunately, it is not cheap. Nowadays, to add the comp and collision coverage on a rental car is $20 a day, $25 a day. Sometimes I've seen it higher than that. So it substantially increases the cost of the rental car, but for good reason, because a lot of these people are out getting in accidents with these rental cars. So, it used to be I remember when it was $6, $7, $8 to add a day to add the comp and collision coverage. But now it's way more than that. And I think because of, all the incidences they have.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Interesting.
yeah, so that's that's how the insurance side of things. And yes, when you rent a car in your name and you get the keys to somebody else, especially somebody that is, not on the rental car contract or agreement, you are assuming a lot of liability, whether you realize it or not. Because if they do get in an accident, the attorneys are they're gonna sue a lot of people, and you're gonna be one of those people. So just make sure that
Right.
you make sure that you're clear and at least let the rental car company know. Say, hey, I'm gonna let little Johnny drive this rental car, because I have a feeling they're going to say, oh, well, we either need to add them to the contract if they can, or a lot of times if they're under 25, they can't even add them to the contract. So they can't even drive a rental car. So
Big times, yeah. Well, and that kind of brings me back to this case. There was a huge Florida Supreme Court case back in 2011 called Chandler v. Geico. Chandler v. Geico. And what happened in that case is someone rented a vehicle, did the contract for, let their friend borrow it, and that friend let their friend borrow it. And guess who got in an accident? That person caused an accident. And so Geico said, hold on, we're not paying for the injuries of this case because that our insured was not driving the vehicle. This is not an owned auto, right? They weren't driving the vehicle. A resident relative wasn't driving the vehicle. The person who ultimately ended up driving it and causing the crash had no relation to our insured. And so it went through litigation, and the Supreme Court held that the renter of the vehicle would be held liable for any damage the vehicle caused. They said, doesn't matter, we feel so strongly about the dangerous instrumentality doctrine that you're still going to be held responsible, even if, this is the kicker, and I feel like this is borderline unfair, but even if the renter explicitly tells people, you cannot drive this car. I rented it. No one else is allowed to drive it. You tell little Johnny and everyone in your family, only I get to drive it, and they still drive it and get in an accident, you're still held responsible. The Supreme Court said it, and it hasn't been overturned. And so really, they only carved out one exception of if it's actually stolen. The vehicle's stolen, you're not going to be held responsible for, what happens as a result of the theft. But anyone, if there is some type of chain of custody that can come back to you, if there's any kind of permissive use, even if you're not permitting it, but it's someone in your family, lends it to someone else, you're going to be held responsible. And Geico still fought it and said, well, that doesn't make sense because our insured wasn't using the vehicle. There's a lot of policy language in, your insurance policy that's going to say they'll cover, incidents where you were using a vehicle. And the Supreme Court made a differentiation between the word use and operation. And they said, I'll read a quote from it because I was like, this is so interesting for people. The use of an automobile denotes its employment for some purpose of the user. The word operation denotes the manipulation of the car's control. Use is thus broader than operation. One can use a car without operating it, they said, which is, I think, wild that is the law in Florida. If you rent a vehicle, you're using it. Even if you let someone else drive it, it's still under your use because you rented it. Someone else might be operating it, but you're still going to be, on the hook. Now, the case I have is very similar to that. Right now, we're kind of in the middle of the fight. It's going to have to go through litigation. But the insurance company is making the same argument. Hey, this person is not related to our insured. And our insured wasn't using the vehicle. And our policy is pretty clear about who we cover. And I'm saying, I understand what your policy says, but this is the law in Florida. So I think people need to understand that if you're renting a vehicle, You just want to make sure. I almost think it's best just to go ahead and buy the rental coverage from the rental car company, because what ultimately is happening here, if your insurance carrier says we are not going to do this claim, they're not going to defend you in a lawsuit. They're saying we're not in play. So now your own personal assets are exposed. And in the case I have, the person who rented the vehicle is someone of great wealth. And this is a very dangerous lawsuit for them. And so I'm sure when they rented the vehicle, they had no concept of all the implications of letting, their son's friend drive it. But these are things that, in case it happens, you guys got to be prepared for these things. Right, John?
Yeah, absolutely. And we get this all the time. People go, well, I'm just going to let them drive it up to the store. They're only going up to the store. They're only going to grab milk or whatever they're going to do. And yes, it's probably unlikely that they get in an accident. But, I was talking to somebody the other day that I know has assets. I know that they're very, wealthy. And we looked at their limits and they had 5,100 limits. And I said, listen,
terrible.
It's just not enough. You got $50,000. The insurance company is going to pay that claim in the blink of an eye. They won't even hesitate. And now you're looking at a lawsuit, that where, God forbid, if somebody's paralyzed or dies or something else like that, it's going to be significant difference. Well, the same thing happens on rental cars as, your own vehicle. So that, that's probably the point of this podcast is, when you rent a vehicle, it's just like driving your own vehicle, only worse because now you've got this third party, this rental car company involved that is saying, hey, here's the way this works. It's our asset. We own this vehicle. If you wreck it, you could be on the hook for not only, injuring somebody else, but now you're on the hook for the vehicle itself. And the insurance company will pay to fix the car and that sort of thing. But there's, like I said, the loss of income and diminution of value are two things that could add up to thousands of dollars. So yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. Do you want to share anything else, or you said you're halfway through the case? Maybe we'll come back and do another podcast once you get it finished. And
yeah, we did our initial, good faith effort at a pre-suit type of negotiation or settlement. This particular insurance carrier is holding their ground, and it's one of the big box carriers that they're not very good with their insureds, I'll just say. They're not really interested in protecting their insureds. And so I think it's really important, if you're listening and all you've done is gone online and signed up for, insurance with one of the brands that does all the commercials, I would advise you to talk to an insurance agent. And there's a lot of better options out there. Some you may not have heard of, but have really great coverage, and I think have a better reputation of, defending their insureds. Because in this case, an insurance company is going to have to look at, they could be held in bad faith if they don't defend their insured in a case like the one I have, which is pretty significant damages, which is why we're going to pursue it in litigation. But they're making a choice. It's only a $250,000 policy. And they're choosing to not even make an offer. If this ends up going through litigation and it goes and the jury returns a verdict beyond that $250,000, not only is their insured now on the hook personally with his assets, he can turn around and sue that insurance carrier for bad faith for not defending him when they should have. So I say all that to say there are really great companies out there who might look at the situation and say, you know what, maybe we feel our policy doesn't apply here. We're going to do the right thing. We're going to actually try to defend our insured. Otherwise, you might find yourself in litigation having to hire your own attorney because your insurance company won't defend you. So that is about to start. And maybe, I don't imagine it being done within the next several months. So It might be something we follow up with in a year. So
it might be next year's podcast. But yeah, no, I agree. I think, part of this podcast is trying to help people both ways. And I will tell you that, firms like Marie's firm and attorneys like her are super valuable. It's funny, people think, oh, the insurance agent attorney relationship is contentious or whatever. And I'm like, it's not
symbiotic.
It's not that way at all. I mean, Marie and her firm and our agency are very good friends, and we talk about stuff all the time, and we help each other because, both of us are trying to fight for our client and have them either get what's owed them, and Marie does a wonderful job of that, or protect them before the event happens. Let's sit down and get you coverage before that kind of thing happens and make sure it's right. So, I've enjoyed having this podcast because I think it's two different angles, but I'll be the first one to tell you, go see an attorney, go sit down with an attorney. Marie's great. Go see an attorney and sit down with them and see what your rights are, because there are a lot more rights and things that you don't know how to deal with. And it's not always best for you to just take what the insurance company offers you. It's
right.
I would tell you it's free to go sit down with Marie and at least have a conversation, because it's, it could be significant damages, and you're going to be surprised at sometimes what they tell you, what you're entitled to. And sometimes they go, you don't have a case, whatever. But, most of the time it's well worth the 30 minutes or whatever it takes to sit down and talk to her. So for those of you out there that are listening, go see Marie and call her. And if you've been in that situation and you need help, go see her.
I was going to say, even because with what you do, when people come to an agent, the whole point of seeing an agent is to help figure out the risk. Like they should be telling you, here's what I own, here are our assets, how well should we be covered, what are the options, what's the best company for me. But a lot, insurance is about risk assessment. And I think that as an attorney who works in these claims all day long, I can very easily explain to someone what they're risking when they don't have certain coverages, which is why I do even before they come meet with you, John, I'd love to sit down and just explain, here is the actual risk. Know this before you go into your meeting with John, or whomever your insurance agent is, so that you can know what you're really trying to protect yourself from. Because I have hundreds of stories to share about really innocent people who weren't expecting to be in an accident and their lives got turned upside down. So that's valuable too. And I think what you guys do is, I so appreciate that you explain, uninsured motorists and things like that to your clients. So we really just want everyone to be protected in case it happens to you.
In case it happens. Well, thanks everybody for watching, listening, however you have found us. We appreciate you taking time to listen to us. And until next time, I'm John Darr, and Marie is here. So if you have any questions, just reach out to us, and feel free to comment. If you're on YouTube or Facebook or wherever you see the podcast, feel free to comment, share it with your friends. Maybe your friends have been in a rental car situation, and maybe they rent cars on a regular basis. Hey, tag, I know Bill rents cars all the time. I wonder if he knows this. Tag him, and maybe he'll listen and learn something. So anyway.
And if you have a topic that you want us to talk about, leave a comment. Say, I really want to hear about this. We would love to talk about it.
Absolutely. Good point. Absolutely. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. Have a great one.